All right,
Oh,
we
wait,
are. Want to restart?
I just need to switch. All right, Evan, you can take it on.
Okay, perfect. So is that the same question that's in our? Okay, that's the exact same question.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So we're group two. And our scenario is a female student reported that she was being sexually harassed by a male student. As the male student enters your office carrying his bag, you notice a strange scent coming from the bag, which you believe is marijuana. Discuss how you would handle both the sexual harassment and drug infraction. How does procedural and substantive due process relate to this situation? So to answer that first part of the question, I thought it'd be important in our textbook. It talks about classroom harassment, and it's just an administrative guide that lists just steps to follow 1 through 10. So to start, number one, formulate district policies and procedures to address sexual harassment for employees and students. Be certain that everyone, faculty, students, and staff understand these policies and the consequences for violating them. Two, establish a zero tolerance policy so that everyone understands the school's position on issues involving harassment. Provide staff development programs periodically for faculty and staff to familiarize them with all aspects of harassment and specific behavior considered to fall in the harassment category. Encourage faculty and students to report all violations through a well-defined, developed, and publicized grievance procedure. Provide educational programs for students on classroom harassment and school sanction associated with harassment conduct. React swiftly and judiciously to complaints filed by students, faculty, and staff so that everyone knows the institution takes harassment seriously. Create an environment where students and school personnel feel comfortable in honestly reporting complaints of harassment free of any form of reprisal. Protect the confidentiality of those filings, complaints to the greatest degree possible. Professional reputation can be damaged if charges prove to be false. Create and maintain a school climate characterized by mutual respect and consideration of others. Based on a recent Supreme Court decision in the Gebser case, students who are sexually abused by teachers cannot recover monetary damages from the school officials unless officials knew of the harassment and were in a position to act and failed to do so. So that kind of covers the school harassment as far as the administrative guide. And then the textbook also provides another really good administrative guide based on suspension. I think that's worth reading off really quick. Adequate notice must be provided to students and parents regarding the existence of rules governing student behavior. These should be clearly communicated to all affected by their implementation. A record should be compiled that includes the following information: infraction allegedly committed, the time of the alleged infraction, the place where the alleged infraction occurred, those persons who witnessed the alleged act, previous efforts made to remedy the alleged misbehavior. Students facing suspension should at minimum be provided some type of notice followed by a brief informal hearing. Students should be provided either oral or written notice of charges against them and the evidence school authorities have to support the charges, and should be provided an opportunity to refute the charges. Because permanent removal is not intended, no delay is necessary between the time notice is given and the time the actual hearing. In most instances, school officials may informally discuss alleged misconduct the students immediately after it is reported. During the hearing, the school official should listen to all sides of the issue. Adequate time should be provided for students to present their side of the issue without interruption. Parents of guardians should be informed of the hearing and provide written notification of the action that results from the hearing. At a minimum, the written notice should include the following: the charges brought against the student, a description of the available evidence used to support the charge, the number of days suspended, determination of whether the suspension is an in-school or out-of-school suspension, a list of other conditions that must be met before the student returns to school, a statement that informs parents or guardians that the suspension can be appealed to the district's pupil personnel director or a designee. Parents or guardians should be informed by phone of the suspension, followed by written notification, which should be promptly mailed, preferably by registered mail on the day of the hearing. So that gets a little wordy, and obviously that's a lot to digest right away, but kind of what I summed up from all of that the first time I read it was kind of have your ducks in a row, have your policies clear and concise, make sure your communication with parents and students and everything is just documented so that nothing can turn around and kind of bite you in the rear with stuff that's not documented.
And I think it's important to note that, like Evan first talked about, like the sexual harassment rather than that's the marijuana from the student, because that would be, you know, the priority, especially since the Supreme Court had said that, you know, they could be sued if there were reports that were not thoroughly investigated, documented appropriately. Like really having that procedural due process in place is so important, and having those policies in place and making sure that we're following those district procedures appropriately.
Whenever there's a sexual harassment allegation, it has to be investigated too. Was one of the main things that I got out of it. So no matter what it is, it has to be investigated and it has to be documented.
I'd also add that there's nothing wrong with investigating the whole marijuana thing, but treat them as two separate pieces. And I'd say your hierarchy right then and there is to attack the harassment charges first, figure out all of that stuff. After you have the other student, the male student that comes in, after you have what you need from him as far as the procedures that you follow in terms of how you interview them, the data and information that you're collecting from them. Then once you're done with the sexual harassment part, then you can say, oh, hey, by the way, then you can start investigating the other thing and then treat it as a separate incident. And then whatever procedures you have at your school as far as investigating drugs, possible drugs or paraphernalia on your person or in a bag or whatever it may be, you follow those. Because I think if you suspect it and you think it's there, then you can't turn a blind eye to it, because there's possibility of drugs being on campus, on school grounds. So then you again follow those procedures. And how it relates to procedural and substantive due process is, you, as Evan pointed out, have your ducks in a row and just go through your steps. Obviously common sense falls into place, but also if you follow all those steps, it should be common sense, and your rear end should be covered, and everything should kind of settle how it's supposed to settle.
And I think, oh, you want me to go ahead?
Yeah.
As far as the marijuana, I don't think that necessarily needs to take a back seat either, because I mean, you can get going on that right away, because
Yep.
As far as reasonable suspicion, you don't need a search warrant. You have reasonable suspicion, just like we kind of stated in our chapter review. Just because we're talking about the sexual harassment doesn't mean we're searching his persons and finding other evidence, to kind of bring the hammer down.
Yep.
There's reasonable suspicion, and it's relevant to what the suspicion is, and it's not a blind sweep. So you're definitely in the right to do so, and it's legal to do so.
You basically hit what I was gonna say. I was gonna talk about the reasonable suspicion. You're allowed to search the backpack because of the scent. You couldn't just search the backpack because the kid's already in trouble.
Yep. And then I don't know if you guys know the legality of sexual harassment. I mean, as long as your policy is pretty clear, but that's the sexual harassment one is obviously really important compared to drugs. But does anybody know as far as when you're supposed to contact law enforcement right away? Does anybody know how that works? Anybody read about that at all?
I don't know how that works. I know that you'd probably take it to your, after everything has been documented, interviewed, and I think at some point you take it to your Title IX officer within your district, and I'm sure with their guidance and other guidance, maybe getting information from an attorney. And so I'm sure that there's a lot of steps there.
And maybe that's a conversation that I would assume it falls on us as administrators to be, kind of the same premise of if someone brings you information about a child being abused at home, you're kind of like a designated, well, like I kind of have to report it now, don't I? Like, so you have to kind of, whatever your procedures are, or I don't think it would just be left up to the family or like, the girl and her parents be like, okay, well, do you want to press charges? Like, do you need to handle this, or is it two separate entities? I don't really know.
Yeah, I think it's going to be from the admin perspective, I guess. We document everything, we follow all of our procedures and policies, and then we communicate as part of that checklist. We're communicating with the parents, and as far as in school suspension, out of school suspension, that's going to be our biggest probably decision, so just what type of suspension, expulsion, and then the legality of charges. I mean, that probably comes from the parents. Wouldn't you guys agree? The
Mhm.
family, I guess.
I would assume so.
Okay. Anything else on this scenario? Okay, we have one more. Here's the next one. This one states, as the principal of a school district, you determine that it is necessary to use a breathalyzer on all students as they enter prom. Discuss the procedures you must take in order to perform this test legally. I first noted that obviously prior to prom, you're informing parents and students that this is the protocol. Like, this is already in your policies and procedures, so it's not completely unexpected of them. They already know what is in place. So it's kind of like the first thing that is happening even before prom.
And you're able to do the breathalyzer test because prom isn't a required thing from students, it's voluntary.
Yep, you get to choose to go, and if you want to go, you have to abide by the expectations and rules. And I think as long as the expectations are set, just like your student handbook that says, this is the way you're supposed to dress at school, this is the way you're supposed to conduct yourself at school events, like if you're expected to, act a certain way, not to mention, there's the expectation is that there's no drugs or alcohol on school grounds. And if prom is happening at your school, I think you have every right to do so. And then kind of the procedures of that is you kind of take it to I would take it to a third party situation where you're like, okay, bring in the county sheriff's department or the local police department to carry out the breathalyzer part, and then kind of wash your hands of the scenario, because if they got MIP, then they got MIP, then they're gone. And then whatever procedures you have as far as discipline for the school of a 2-week suspension or whatever it may be, that's what you follow.
Yeah, this one is definitely a little bit more clear cut, I guess, with your policies, and being legal to do so makes it simple, I guess. But to go kind of a little bit of a step further, I guess, having someone there that's trained, whether it's police officers or parents, to do the breathalyzers, I guess, have a policy in place if somebody does end up blowing positive and has alcohol in their system. You don't want to be sitting there with, what do you do now? So definitely have a policy with, do you notify parents, and do you let the parents just come pick them up? Do you notify law enforcement right away, and then law enforcement takes over? So that can definitely be laid out in the policy.
Okay, anything else on this scenario?